Hi, everyone. Um, this is part two of our Family Peer Specialist certification, optimizing organizational flow to prepare family peer specialists to apply. And we're certainly glad you're here today. So the training topics today will be organization, the flow, record keeping, and management. Some of the important pieces that you can really help your staff by keeping organized as well. Preparing certified family peer support candidates to meet the training requirements. Writing a robust lived experience narrative. That is extremely important, and verifying work experience. And that basically, if you keep a living, breathing resume and document, or if you encourage your staff to keep a resume that they can update as they take trainings, and also update as they learn new skills or move along in your organization. So the learning objectives are, by the end of today's training, we want to make sure that you can determine if potential candidates meet the lived and work experience requirements for the National Family Peer Specialist certification. We want to support family peer specialist candidates in writing a robust lived experience narrative. We want to create job descriptions that accurately describe the role of a family peer specialist. And of course, we want to complete the supervisor verification form with ease. And that's for you to be able to do.
Thanks, Gail. So I'm going to start with the first training topic today, talking about how candidates can demonstrate lived experience on the Family Peer Specialist application. So wanted to start by reading off our definition at the National Federation of lived experience. The way in which a person experiences and understands their life and the world from their own unique perspective. It includes knowledge gained from these experiences and choices, because we know that self-disclosure and sharing of life experience can help others experiencing the same challenges and offer knowledge and understanding to those people who've only heard or read about such experiences. So we often hear this term lived experience referring to having personal experience living with mental health and or substance use challenges. But most of us in the family peer support world, we think of lived experience for family members as personal experience as a parent, family member, or primary caregiver of a child across the lifespan, or another family member who has that mental health and or substance use challenge. That individual may or may not have their own personal experience with mental health and substance use challenges. Is that pretty clear, Wanda? The difference? Wanda might be on mute there, but hopefully that difference between personal lived experience and family lived experience is clear in that definition, with the family in the dark blue. So
go
ahead, go.
No, go ahead.
So we want to make sure that when we're hiring potential certified family peer specialist candidates, that we make sure they have the family peer experience. So here we've differentiated that adult peers are adults that have that personal experience living with mental health or substance use. Youth peers also have personal experience, but they have that experience when they're young, and the age depends on the state that you're in, what that certification is, but it's generally thought of as people that are 26 years old or younger. It can be a little younger in some states, a little older in others. And then family peers, again, they are a person who has experience as a parent, a family member, or a primary caregiver of someone with mental health or substance use challenges. So it can be really important to distinguish these three types of peers at the beginning when you're determining whether or not someone qualifies to apply to become a certified family peer specialist. Does that make sense, Wanda?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. Okay, and I'll pass it back to Gail.
Yeah, and before I go on, I forgot to introduce Wanda Douglas. Thank you for being here to help us with our first training, and we really appreciate it. So, why is a written narrative required? Well, it's the document. If we don't have the documentation, we're not going to be able to confirm or deny whether you have accomplished your goals in meeting the needs, the requirements. So we need that documentation. We also have to have the candidate demonstrate the ability to share their lived experience. That's why writing a really succinct and clear document for your experience is very, very crucial to being part of the family peer support movement, but also part of applying and taking your certification test. So the demonstration also of the candidate's autonomy and ability to complete important tasks and independently. This is really important. Sometimes we see candidates who did not write their own personal statement. It was written by the supervisor who's trying to, and we understand this, push along several different candidates at once and may write the personal statement because they feel intimately knowledgeable about the candidate. We don't want that. We want the candidate's own words and their own personal statement and their own views. This is family driven, and our candidates are as much a family member as everybody else. And of course, the demonstration of the candidate's writing skills. This gives us a clear picture of who the candidate is and what they can accomplish. So, how do we explain the role as a parent or a caregiver? This is really important in the narrative. What is your role? What have you done? Are you a primary caretaker, or are you just happen to take care of your neighbor's child who has a behavioral health issue? Now, that's very clearly two different types of caregiving. One is being the primary caregiver is the type that we look for. So I can't stress enough that you have to demonstrate how you are in daily contact with the individual that you're caring for, that you have a primary responsibility of helping that individual, that child, make decisions. And you're the primary, that child lives with you. If you babysit a niece or a nephew who has a behavioral health issue, that is wonderful. But that does not qualify an individual to be a family peer specialist. So it's very important that you explain that role clearly. Information about the specific mental health and substance use challenges of a loved one. We want to hear how you proceeded and how you navigated that. Systems navigated on behalf of your loved one. That means, did you go to IEP meetings? Did you go to school meetings? Did you talk to the pediatrician? How did you help your child that you were giving that care to navigate the systems? And resources that you accessed. How did you get the resources? What did you do? What were those key pieces that made your child move through successfully? Sometimes there's a barrier. And how did you overcome those challenges and barriers?
So we do have some exemplars on our website. So when you get these slides, if you click this button, read more, you'll be taken to a few different styles of how to convey all that information that Gail just went over into a narrative. So I'm just going to read parts of this one and point out those different components that we were looking for. So this parent said, Lonnie, my oldest daughter, came to be with me when she was 14 years old. She had an extensive history of trauma coming into the Department of Children and Families at the age of 3 from abandonment. So she's identified her role. She is a foster or adoptive parent who became a parent to a child at the age of 14. She's identified at least one of the systems that her child has navigated, the Department of Child and Families. And then in the next sentence, she talks about foster homes, hospitals, and residential placements, some more systems. And then in the second paragraph, this parent says, Lonnie carried diagnoses of PTSD, bipolar, ADHD, ODD, and RAD. So giving us a little more information about the specific mental health challenges that her child has experienced. Then kind of scanning through the rest of what this parent has talked us about. If we come down here to this sentence, my job as a parent quickly focused on educating, advocating, and finding care for our family with our daughter and her mental health struggles. So she's identifying some of the different things that she had to do to get resources and support for her family, saying that it should have been easier. She learned she needed to find the right people and to fight for her. So identifying how to overcome some of the challenges that she had and continuing to list some more systems, education, mental health, developmental services, child and families. And then at the very end, closing out with an accomplishment demonstrating how she overcame those barriers. My greatest accomplishment was convincing her team to transfer her to a public high school. When that happened, she not only flourished, she graduated a year early. So actually showing the candidates who are applying for certification examples of some of these lived experiences and asking them maybe to even go through and find the different components of the narrative can be an exercise to support folks when they are applying. And here's some other tips for you to support the candidate's writing as they're completing this lived experience narrative. The first is, like Gail said, sometimes supervisors can try to overhelp when they're trying to get a lot of candidates through that process, but as a leader, resist that urge to write for them, help them alongside their own writing. It can be really helpful to ask them questions, to have them verbally share their lived experience. That might be a medium they're more confident in. Could even record that so that they can use that as a tool when they're ready to actually put the words onto paper. Again, sharing those exemplars and analyzing them. You can even look at those exemplars and point out similarities in the verbal version of their lived experience that they have shared with you that you see written down in the exemplars. It could also be helpful to provide them with a document that has either section headers or questions if they're really having trouble organizing their thoughts. And I put some potential questions that could either start conversations or become headers there off to the side. What was it like supporting your loved one through their mental health and substance use challenges? What kind of interactions with schools, therapists, and other systems did you have? How did you find support and resources? How did they affect your family's well-being? Those are just some tips and suggestions, and I'm going to pass it back to Gail now.
So we assess the potential staff members' lived experience in job applications. We do pre-screening calls in the interview process. And this is all you as a supervisor or as a hiring person would do. And it's okay to ask direct questions. And you can pose scenarios and do role playing. Also, it's great when you're interviewing a potential employee to request a writing sample about lived experience. That way you will get an idea of what type of lived experience they have and where they'll fit into your organization, and also their writing skills. And take notes to support your coaching when candidates are writing their lived experience and their narratives. Really, really important that the beginning of helping a candidate get certified starts right there at the job interview. So these are some things that you should keep in mind as you're interviewing candidates for a job, whether they're certified or not. So some of the sample questions you can ask, and we do this all the time. And of course, these are Department of Labor, okay. So can you share a bit about yourself and your experiences in your own life and allow you to understand this work in a more complete way? The one I use a lot is give an example of a time you had to advocate for yourself or someone else. That's a really good question to ask. And what are some of the agencies and systems in your community that you have navigated in your own personal journey? And you can give them, a combination of these in scenarios. Is that me or you? Still me. Demonstrating work experience on the application. So when you fill out your application, if you have a narrative that is written prior to the time you are going to fill out the application, it might be really good to help when you do the application. Something that's very distinct, though, that we really, really need to be clear about is the difference between the adult peer work support force, the youth peer work support, I'm sorry, youth peer support workforce, and the family peer support workforce. Although they all have the word peer support in it, they're very different nuances. And it's very clear that a potential staff member and a candidate understands their job duties very well. Adult peer support means you give that peer support on a one-on-one level. You to another adult who has experienced somewhat of a similar challenge as you have. So you help that person as a peer-to-peer, navigating their challenges. The youth peer support workforce does very similar to the adult peer workforce, where they really focus on a young person, usually under 18, the person they're supporting, possibly up to age 26, and help them with their challenges, walking side by side, saying, when I was 18, I had anxiety, so I can understand what you're doing, and kind of help them navigate one-on-one. But the real key difference is what the family peer support workforce is. And this is important to understand and have your staff understand as well. A family peer specialist does not work with the children. They work with the parent or primary caregiver. That means they work with those caregivers to help their children. Oftentimes in this field, you will hear new family peer specialists say, oh, I sat down and I was talking to the children and we were coloring and we did an activity and we were doing that and I was supporting the child. No, that's not what now that's not saying you can't do that. If you were coloring with the child so her parent could maybe make a special phone call, that might be considered family peer specialist work. But what you really need to do is understand that it's parent to parent, caregiver to caregiver. That child has their own set of supports. You're supporting the family. Is that clear, Wanda? I don't know. Did I make that clear?
Yes, that's absolutely clear. You definitely supporting the family, the parent of that child, so that they can get the services that they need to better support the children.
Exactly. Thank you, Wanda.
So there are distinct job tasks associated with family peer support as well. And so that's something that when we are reviewing an application and we're looking at that part of the application where either a family peer specialist can just copy and paste the job description that you as an organizational leader have created, or they can write a narrative about their work experience. So it would help your family peer specialist to have a smoother application process if you're creating a job description of what their job is that includes some of these things that we are typically looking for to convince us that the work being done is family peer support. So there's a complete list of job tasks on our website, linked there in the slide, where our 5 core competencies for certified family peer specialists are. And I've just pulled a few out that are really important and crucial to really differentiate the family peer support from the others. So family peer specialists promote family voice and choice at systems levels. They share their lived experience to affect policy change and encourage families to do the same. They negotiate with community partners to help families meet their goals. They assist families in identifying and using their natural supports. They promote understanding of caregiver rights and responsibilities in various places. They promote and model resiliency. They offer wellness education resources, reinforce positive parenting skills, and assist families in asserting their rights to meet their goals. So when we see things like this in a job description, we feel really confident that the work being performed that is required to get certified is going to support those folks in their jobs and in the support offered to families. So it can be tricky because sometimes a part of the job is beyond family peer support. And we know that family peers are going to be doing things that don't always fit perfectly into those job tasks from the 5 core competencies. But we want to see 500 or more hours of direct family peer support as a part of the work experience. So you'll see on the left-hand side some things that absolutely count towards that 500 hours. When they are doing peer work, either meeting with an individual family member or maybe a mom and dad to provide that one-on-one peer support service, like the things that we just talked about on the previous slide, those hours absolutely count. We also know that notes and documentation related to that direct family peer support is a regular part of their job tasks. That's one of the professional roles and responsibilities. So that also counts towards those 500 hours. We know that if they're gathering resources or making connections with system staff related to direct family peer support for an individual family member or family, that's also a part of that direct family peer support. So those things all count towards that 500 hours. What doesn't count is if a family peer specialist is facilitating some kind of group session or training. That's not, that absolutely is a part of their job, but it's not going to count towards that 500-hour work requirement. We know that they have to take a lot of trainings to qualify to become a certified family peer specialist, but those trainings also don't count towards the 500 hours. If they deliver trainings either to colleagues or other staff in other systems, that also does not count. And then if they might be hired against best practices, they might be hired to offer family peer support to family members and adult peer support or youth peer support to individuals. Those hours doing youth or adult peer support would not count, and it's not best practices. Yes, Wanda.
So in capturing those 500 hours, is that going to be recorded on their resume?
That is a fabulous question. And the answer is no, it is not. The way that you're going to demonstrate that work experience, there's basically 4 different aspects. The resume is going to demonstrate the job tasks and the length of time that they have been at that position. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm reviewing a resume. What have they put under their family peer specialist job on the resume in terms of what they're doing, and how long have they been in that position? Have they had other jobs before that support the same types of skills? That's what we're looking for on the resume. And then we review those tasks that could be a part of a job description that they would copy and paste into the online application, or they would write a narrative about their work experience that demonstrates that. So we don't need to know every little thing they do, but just kind of, you know, a bullet point list of the job that has the job description tasks, or if they're doing something that the job they were hired for is not explicitly family peer specialist work, but they are doing the tasks of family peer specialists, that's when they would choose to write a narrative instead of copying their job description. Does that make sense?
Kind of. What about the individual that has the lived experience, but is just now getting into the field, who doesn't have on their resume, they
Mhm.
I use one example. She's a nurse, but she has been the primary caregiver for her daughter who's
Mhm.
had mental health challenges, but she's just now becoming getting into this field.
Right.
So how does that work where she doesn't have all of those job tasks that strictly relates to the work experience for
Mhm.
family peer specialists?
So if she is not hired as a family peer specialist, she does still need to get those 500 hours of work experience somehow. So if that's at a volunteer position, for example, if that volunteer position doesn't come with a job description, that might be when they would choose to write the narrative that explains how they are performing some of those tasks we talked about, giving us a little bit of proof, a little bit of evidence that, because again, we have to go back to the documentation piece. We have to include on our end documentation that they have that experience of working 500 hours plus in family peer support.
What it really means is she may not be eligible to apply until she gets some of that hands-on experience, really.
Mhm.
Right.
A lot of times, if you look at states, and I know North Carolina was one of them, they were saying you don't need your certification for X amount of months because they recognize that you may end up being employed as a family peer specialist and not have your certification because you need to gain those hours of training. And of course, if you're helping a neighbor and you've been doing some family peer specialist work, neighbor to neighbor, helping them, you're
Mhm.
not getting paid for that, but you're sitting with your friend or your neighbor at an IEP meeting. Count
Mhm.
those hours because you're doing that. You're doing it informally and not being paid, but you're still doing those tasks. Something I wanted to quickly go back to the other slide that doesn't count, and it's really an important one. A lot of times, family members have been asked to sit or lead, such as chair a state collaborative or a mental health meeting, and they're participating because they want to hear that person's voice. That's fabulous, and a lot of family peer specialists do that. But that type of job, that type of task does not show that direct service task that we're looking for. So that would not count either.
Thank you, Gail. And then so the 3 ways on the application that they're going to demonstrate work experience: resume, job description, or work experience narrative. And then they have to connect us to a qualified supervisor. So they're going to put the contact information here on the application. And then Gail's going to talk about the supervisor verification.
Okay. So in the process of consulting, mentoring, and guiding a family peer specialist by reviewing the family peer specialist interactions with family members and discussing the challenges raised, as a supervisor, this is what you do. And you strategize those resolutions or the barriers, what have you encountered? This is the skill of the supervisor to really help a individual, their staff member or potential candidate, really go through the process and look at different challenges that might be happening or successes. And you as the supervisor can point them out and actually redirect or compliment. And obviously we want to make sure that our supervisors have that experience that they need to actually supervise a family peer specialist. So, and it's just basically your reference contact if we have to check on a reference, if we have a question and we need to call you, you put your contact information. We ask for the supervisor's resume, your organization contact, the time frame, how long have you supervised this individual? How many hours? And of course, the signature is required. So what are some of the things to consider for organizational success? So as an organization, how can you compensate uncertified family peers as they complete work experience? As we just talked about, some of your family peers aren't going to have that 500 hours to actually apply. So how do you bring in money as an organization to pay for that individual if your organization was, for example, able to bill for Medicaid once an individual was certified? So prior to certification, how do you bring in the money? How do you fund an individual to work in your field? There are many, many different ways, and we know through grants, through block grants, system of care grants, putting it in the budget to have, hire family peer specialists directly in your budget, maybe for X amount of months until that person gets their certification and they can bill for Medicaid. Or if your state is not Medicaid billable, you're going to have to include some compensation no matter what. How can family peers with experience support new family peers? Well, that's easy. That is something we as family members do almost naturally. So finding those opportunities and having an intake process where you have families who need that support. How many families can your organization successfully support, considering the number of currently certified and soon to be certified family peers? It's a big challenge. And Wanda, you know this better than anyone. We might be training and certifying all these family peers, but where are they going to be placed next? How are we going to get them that experience, not only their work experience, but a job that will pay them for a living wage? So we have to really think about, are we over flooding the field and just training a whole bunch of people just to sit and wait for a job maybe or maybe not to happen? So we have to figure a different way. What's step 2? And Wanda, I know from the conversations we've had, you actually have a very robust way of helping people get trained, get certified, and then help if you can with job placement. So I think that's fabulous.
I think another thing to consider is if you overcommit yourself too, committing to supporting too many families, and you have people who aren't yet certified who are in the process and who at some point maybe decide they don't want to continue forward. So kind of finding that balance of not too much, not too little, just right. How many families can your organization really thrive with, and figuring that out over time and adjusting it as your organization grows as well.
I think there's also that possibility that some will weed themselves out in the course of either getting the 500 hours or not getting the 500 hours once they get through the initial training. So that's going to happen naturally.
Yeah.
In terms of how many will progress all the way through completing the hours as well as taking the national certification exam.
Oh, and I think so. And some people might just say, hey, this isn't for me. I didn't think I thought I'd like this job, but I don't.
Or just continue to do volunteer work in a community and not necessarily get employed with an organization within the community.
Right.
Yeah.
And
that's okay too.
Yeah. And these skills are transferable. These are great skills to have, even in supporting your own family when they're going through challenges. This is a great workforce and applicable skills to everybody. So decide when and how to introduce the lived experience narrative. Again, we can't stress that you should always be thinking about this from the day you're interviewing an individual. Support the family peer specialist in translating their lived experience to paper. And be the most challenging piece is you as a supervisor to do is to really help that person put down what they mean to say, because sometimes that's the biggest challenge, and sometimes that's the scariest challenge of a family peer specialist is knowing that they're going to have to write this down. So that is a real good place where you can support your staff. Communicate what tasks to do and do not count towards the certification process. And again, if you look at that do's and don'ts slide, that's a very, very clear way of really thinking about it. It's really that direct support piece that counts. Develop organizational hiring and staffing practices that will best support current and future family peer specialists. So that's obviously something you really need to do and think forward before you even start hiring individuals. Wanda, you look like you may have a question. Do you have a question?
No, I'm good.
Okay, you look intense. Anyways, I hope this quick overview helped as part 2. Any questions at all?
You did say something about positions that are Medicaid billable. Can you go over that a little bit?
Sure. Now, I'm more familiar with the state of North Carolina than I am of any state. And I know they're definitely coming up with service definitions that will allow a family peer specialist to be billable. And as I've been saying for 10 years in that state, it's coming. And I know they're very sincere. It takes a little bit of time to open up the spas and really create a definition. But if a state in general allows a service definition to bill family peer specialists, that's one way to bring in income. And that is really based on the amount of time you work with an individual and you bill Medicaid just for that direct service pieces, not sitting at meetings, actually not even documenting care, but really doing the exact work. That's one way an organization can support and sustain the field. Another way could be from doing an in lieu Medicaid definition. Some of the MCOs will they have a pocket of money from Medicaid that they can use to support families and individuals with mental health or substance use issues. And they can say, this pocket of money is going to go to X, and that's called an in lieu definition, and it's out of Medicaid as well. But that managed care organization will say, this is for family peer specialists to do the work within our organization. So that's another way you can fund family peer specialists. Obviously, a clear and best practice way is to just put it in your budget and make a commitment as an organization to fund family peer specialists at a livable wage. And lastly, and you know this, it's for, you can do it out of grants, like the System of Care grants, or the Statewide Family Network grants, or other grants out of SAMHSA that really ask for family involvement and family peer specialists to work with other families.
Scale.
And also in North Carolina, a family peer specialist can be part of a package for Medicaid billing right now with the high fidelity wraparound billable wage.